The first song is over way too quickly. I start the next one right away, so there's no break in between. What I'm playing is the intro to Wollt ihr das Bett in Flammen sehen? I think it was our producer who suggested the title of the song, Do You Want to See the Bed in Flames? Before then, the song was called something completely different, since nobody wanted to say, hey, let's play Wollt ihr das Bett in Flammen sehen? That would sound pretty goofy. When we first wrote the song, we called it Der Bringer, basically the same in English, The Bringer. We liked the main riff a whole lot. That riff just brings it, is what we thought. The lyrics came much later. But since the record has the other title, the official one, I'm not going to write it again. A lot of times the crew didn't know which song we're going to playing when we said Der Bringer. And so now we always write the official title on the setlist. I really love playing it. In one spot, I suddenly start jumping around like crazy, then go back and standing stiff as a board in front of my keyboard for the next verse, as if nothing happened. I once did it without thinking when I was really drunk, and since then I keep having to repeat it, or else it might look like I did feel like it, or my heart wasn't completely in it that night. Of course, it's completely pointless to repeat such a spontaneous thing, but otherwise I'd spend the whole concert just standing there, and that would be disappointing too. Unfortunately, after a little bit of jumping around, I'm completely out of breath and have already broken a sweat. And it's only the second song. At the end of the song, Till stands in what we call the Ring of Fire. Everybody in the band likes Johnny Cash. I don't know a single person who doesn't like Johnny Cash. His song is about love. Our Ring of Fire is made of actual fire and doesn't have that much to do with love. Also, I'm standing a few meters away, it's already too hot for me, and I have to hold my breath. The most dangerous thing about fire isn't the heat itself, but rather the chance that you might get it in your lungs. The heat on your body just hurts, especially if you already burned yourself the day before. It's a little like when you got a bad sunburn. Before we thought up the Ring of Fire, that was a flamethrower part. Here Till got to really let loose with a flamethrower. Basically he emptied it because the song usually came last. Now it's the second song and it's already over. I leave my finger on the key to let the last note ring out until the bass starts the intro to Keine Lust. This song has a particular charm. It's in a 6/8 rhythm, a fast blues. It was one of the first things we came up with when, after a long break, we started collecting ideas for what would eventually be the Reise album, though we didn't know it at the time, of course. If we hadn't already had a song that we called The Bringer, Keine Lust would have been it. On stage, I stand between two keyboards, a sampler made by a company called Ensoniq that went out of business a long time ago, and a Roland organ, which sadly isn't made anymore either. I guess that's just how life works. Most of the really good things in this world are quickly replaced by things that are supposedly better, but in reality much worse. At most, they just leave out all the old ports and plugs so they aren't compatible with anything. Just so long as there's always something new. For example, when my glasses broke and I went to the optician to buy a new pair, the optician looked at me like I was from outer space and told me he had never seen this model before. It must be from an ancient collection. The fact was, so, I bought those glasses just 2 years earlier in the same store, or well, at least it only felt like 2 years. I bought the sampler that I use on stage along with a backup on eBay, and luckily I know someone who can repair this kind of gear. If he ever moves away, I'm screwed. I had the same kind of sampler when I first joined Rammstein, and I don't know where I would get all the sounds if the two I have now stopped working. Because these samplers are so old, they have a very limited amount of storage space. So limited that young people can't even imagine it. Early on, I used to have to insert a floppy disk into the drive before every song to load the sounds I needed. The whole band would have to wait on me. For that reason, I had a hard drive built into one of the samplers. But I didn't know how finicky these machines were, and during one concert I got all excited and hit it with a microphone stand. It must have broken the hard drive because I couldn't play for the rest of the show. The sampler didn't want to read my floppy disk anymore either. I stood there on stage like an idiot, gesturing apologetically. The band was pissed, of course, since we were also missing the sequences that they're all used as cues. Even then, our music was built on us as human beings, playing along to a groove made on a computer. In order to produce this, I would tap out a rhythm or a melodic line with my fingers and then quantize it. That meant the notes were arranged into a rhythm so perfect that I could never actually have played it. Sometimes I also dropped in a breakbeat, which is a drum part that I sampled, i.e. recorded, and then altered in such a way that it fits our song. Schneider then just played along by ear. When each particular part came along, I would press start on the sampler, and when there was a pause, I pressed stop. If another loop was needed in the chorus, I had to switch. On beat, of course, so that the sampler, which is to say the sequencer built into the sampler, would play the right thing on the first beat. And so I had my hands completely full on stage and had to really concentrate, because the band was following me. To make sure something like what happened to the hard drive couldn't happen again, we took the sequences off my sampler and recorded them onto a MIDI player. But since it was still me who had to work the thing, there was just a much room for error. Now the backliners take care of it. I'm up to my ears in it, as it is, as the people say, assuming they still actually say that. In making the album Reise Reise and on tour afterward, I also used an Apple laptop. I bought a program called Logic and downloaded a massive number of instrument plugins. But I kept having to update the operating system, so I could download all the latest innovations and then the old instruments wouldn't work anymore. And when I tried to download the updates for the old instruments, then either they didn't exist anymore or precisely the sound that I used for my song were missing. And at crucial moments, to my horror, the whole computer would freeze. Plus, there were thousands of different sounds available for every single instrument. If I were thinking of a particular sound, I would spend hours searching through some data bank only to end up forgetting what I'd actually been looking for. I probably had a million options, but actually they all sounded like shit, pardon the language. And if I ever did happen to find an interesting sound, it would turn out that it only sounded good on its own and wasn't even audible when combined with other instruments. I just about went insane and finally just went back to my old sampler. For sounds that I use again and again, like the choir and the strings, I've got the other organ. So now I just jump goofily back and forth between the two instruments. Man, Sehnsucht has already started. I was completely lost in thought. I didn't even notice. That's been happening to me more and more often recently. We've playing these two songs back to back for such a long time now that I start playing Sehnsucht automatically. By the way, Sehnsucht, which means longings, is a word that Americans really have an awful time trying to pronounce. When they say it, it sounds like chainsaw. That's Kettensäge in German and actually fits the song pretty well. In fact, it fits better than Sehnsucht, but of course we don't want to sing our songs in English. Right at the outset, a few explosions go off over our heads in sync with the drum hits. When we started, we had to work on this song forever before the explosions fit the drumming exactly. That's really important, since they are so loud that we would get completely offbeat if they exploded at the wrong time. It's incredibly hard to synchronize the pyrotechnic with the music because the fireworks have to be ignited first, and you never know how long it's going to take. During the bridge, a green wall of fire climbs up the side of the stage, and I'm happy to see it burn evenly, since it looks really good. A bit later, a foul-smelling cloud of smoke blows my way. It's really burned your nose. It doesn't just smell poisonous, it probably is poisonous. On Sehnsucht, Till also does his famous hammer. Every singer has his own idiosyncrasies, and Till once had the impulse at the show to incessantly pound his fist into his knee. Now he does it whenever it's musically appropriate. At certain intense moments he even does it with both fists. That's a double hammer. When Till first started, his ties were always black and blue afterward. In the final chorus, he bashed the microphone into his forehead as hard as he can. He hits it so hard the microphone breaks, or maybe that's his skull. You can hear the crack over the speakers. Who says that only guitarists get to break their instruments? Then he throws the microphone into the crowd. The guy who catches it gets really excited and takes it home. He won't be able to use it, but that doesn't matter. It won't occur to him that tomorrow night Till is going to repeat the same procedure with a new microphone, and because Till bangs it against his forehead every time, his skin there gets rubbed raw. When we play several days back to back, his forehead is like a disaster area. The wound doesn't have time to heal. One time they wouldn't let Till in the swimming pool. As a lifeguard on duty saw it, he just had too many open wounds. And the thing is, we love swimming pools. There's nothing better than going to the pool the day after a concert and swimming till all the alcohol has left your body. So actually it's even better to stay at a hotel where you can go swimming right after the concert. Hotels would rather close their pools at night. But a lot of times Tom managed to convince them to leave the pool open for us. He tells them we urgently have to relax our muscles. Naturally, Tom doesn't mention that we also really want to party. We used to take as many women to the hotel with us as we could, and we'd immediately throw them in the pool. Then, most of the women would take their clothes off. As a precaution, we'd then throw their clothes into the pool so they couldn't run away so quickly. And right afterward, a few liquor bottles would go flying into the water, and whenever we swam by one, we'd take a big swig. After that, we couldn't really navigate the hallways and went wandering naked around the elevators. The next morning, the hotel staff acted really solemn around us. Floating sadly in the pool were the empty bottles, those ugly plastic pool chairs, and a few articles of clothing. At the bottom of the pool were 2 leafy plants along with their pots. Now they finally had enough water. No one knew how it had all gotten in there, since actually we hadn't had anything to drink and had all gone to bed early. Now comes Asche zu Asche, ashes to ashes. My God, the time is flying by. I feel like the concert just started. Sometimes I'm afraid my life is slipping by me just as quickly as a concert. I've only just gotten into the swing of things and already it's a third over. At this rate, I won't be until the encore that I can really start having fun. But we are not there yet. As for my life, I'm hoping I'm just at the halfway mark. Paul steps forward and stands at center stage. He's the only one playing. He's just shredding on his distinct guitar riff. Then Richard walks up alongside him and joins in. They stand there like a wall, and since both are playing the same riff, the effect is even more powerful. They each voice the chords somewhat differently, and the friction emerges between the guitars. When 2 instruments play the exact same thing, sometimes what happens is that instead of getting louder, the notes cancel each other out. I love it when the guitarists stand next to each other and play in harmony like this. They really look like a force, like in chess when 2 rooks are stacked on top of each other. Nobody's getting past them. You might think that with two guitarists in a band, there might be a bit of rivalry. And maybe that was the case with us at one time. But by this point, we are all old enough to know that fundamentally we are stronger when we work together rather than against one another. Now the drums come in. Small explosions go off above our heads to match the individual drum beats. Even though I should really know it's coming. I mean, it happens on almost every song. It startles me again and again. Now that we were a little more well known in Germany, the desire grew in us to go and play in the US. Only then would we be a real band, we thought. At the end of the day, it was no great feat to become famous in Germany with German lyrics. But if Americans who didn't understand the lyrics thought we were good, that would mean that we actually made good music. Plus we felt like the European music market was dominated by America anyway. When it came to music, America set the tone for the entire world. Naturally, no one was there to roll out the red carpet for us. Strictly speaking, no one was there to welcome us at all when we flew to New York for the first time for a test run. Nevertheless, we were totally excited. We checked right into the Chelsea Hotel and immediately felt like we were part of the international arts scene. Also, the hotel was anything but luxurious. I had never seen such filthy rooms in a hotel. Not only could we not lock the door to our room, we couldn't even close it. It had been kicked open too many times. Apparently our room on the 10th floor was the same room in which Sid Vicious has killed either his girlfriend or himself. Thankfully, a painter who had lived on the top floor for years let us up on the roof. And we sat up there every night drinking beer, eating untold amounts of food from plastic containers that we had filled up at the steam tables at the Daily while staring up to the skyscrapers. We couldn't believe it. How did this happen? When I was a kid, I never would have thought it possible. Back then in my childhood, there was a long time when I considered the radio the highest authority. Actually, higher than God. Everything that came out of the radio was good and true. And every now and then, or even most of the time, what was in the radio was really good music. If I was lucky, the radio was on and I was there when a good song was playing. I was as happy as a child, and no wonder, because I was one. I had no notion that there was such a thing as a radio station where a disc jockey sat playing records. I thought someone was singing a song and I just happened to be able to hear it through the radio. What I imagined wasn't a radio station, but rather a kind of intelligent cloud that was always just there and music came out of it. I listened very carefully, because it could well be that the good song that was playing would never be played again. Sometimes I also said what the musicians' names were, but I didn't really know what to do with that information. Then I learned that in the West there were supposedly records by a few of these bands. I felt that records were made for people like me, that is, for people who couldn't go to concerts. I didn't know anything about concerts. I didn't even know if the singers or bands I heard on the radio were still alive. Because it was a West German station I was listening to, I assumed that music only exists outside of East Germany. And so I was completely surprised when I saw my first band at the Free German Youth Festival. But they too came from Uproad. It was a long time before I finally went to see an East German band playing a concert in Plenterwald in Berlin. I think the band's name was Reform, either that or Magdeburg. I was impressed by the volume. It hit me so hard it was almost painful, but the music wasn't close to the kind of music I liked. Still, though, the band was living proof that you can be a musician in the GDR. Without a trace of doubt, I decided I also wanted to be a musician. That wasn't a career choice. The idea that making music could be a career would never have occurred to me. I mean, you might like collecting stamps or eating cabbage, but you wouldn't call either a career. Nor it's a career to love a woman and raise children, or to grow up. None of these things are particularly easy, they are just inevitable. Since I couldn't sing, I would have liked to try, of course. Even as a kid, it was clear to me that singers were special. That meant I had to learn to play an instrument. Most of the instruments I knew about sounded really pitiful on their own, and I couldn't count on being able to find friends who would play with me. And so the only options I was left with were guitar and piano. By simple arithmetic, it was clear to me that I could make considerably more music with 88 keys and 10 fingers than with 6 strings in one hand. Piano was also harder to learn, so, and what good were 2 hands when they always seemed to want to play the same damn thing? And if the only notes I could come up with were so strange. But even with my first attempts to sing up a song on my own, I noticed how little it mattered whether I could play well or not. So long as someone sang along, 1 or 2 notes were enough accompaniment. Sometimes my brother brought a few classmates over after school, and they thought it was fun to mess around a little with me on piano. We just acted like we were a band. My brother's friends sang lyrics from songs they knew from the radio. I had never heard these songs before and thought our versions were simply brilliant. You couldn't say what we were doing was in any particular music style, but when the Neue Deutsche Welle groups like Trio started to appear, we felt completely understood, like we also were a part of it. Meanwhile, my piano lessons were the complete opposite of this. There I pounded out sonate after sonate without any emotion and was just happy not to make too many mistakes. Unfortunately, I had to play these pieces at recitals every now and then. I would get so nervous beforehand that I felt physically sick. I just wanted to go to bed and let the music be music. I was amazed to discover how sweaty my hands could get. From then on, I considered it a good idea to pour cologne over my hands before a recital. This made them feel really strange, and you could now smell me before you heard me. The cologne didn't help with the trembling, but I somehow managed to play my pieces and continued the suffer through my lessons. But later on, when I met real musicians, I realized the bands usually didn't need a piano. Maybe for a few little twinkling notes in a love song, but otherwise they would all get along perfectly fine without me. And piano sounded so boring. It always just sounded like a piano. If only I'd learned guitar, which guitar at least you could put the awesome distortion on it. But there were more than enough guitarists. Then I heard about keyboard players. That seemed to be a better kind of piano player. These people could also play organ or synthesizer. I didn't know what a synthesizer was supposed to be. Actually, I still don't know. Something with oscillators and a mode wheel that squeals like something in a Pink Floyd song. But I was assuming there weren't bands like Pink Floyd in the GDR, so I didn't need that part. And then Trio came along with their Casio. And I went out and got myself a keyboard like theirs. And now, here I sat with my band in New York City. I used the early morning hours when I couldn't sleep to explore the neighborhood around the hotel. Like a little insect, every day I dared to venture a little farther away from the hive. I often went past Madison Square Garden, though without noticing it. First, I had no idea that the place even still existed, since all the live albums I knew that were recorded at there were over 20 years old. And second, I wasn't looking for a music venue at all. I was convinced that it really was a garden, or at least a park where bands recorded their live albums. The actual venue looked almost dainty among all the gigantic skyscrapers. Also, I couldn't see how the trucks were supposed to drive up to it. Really, it didn't look like a venue at all. My impression wasn't all that far off, as our technicians would later confirm. They had all kind of trouble getting our gear into the venue whenever we played there. But back then we were playing in tiny clubs. It was because of these concerts that we were here in the first place. We wanted to spark Americans' interest. But the shows weren't very glamorous. We tried to take a taxi to the club, but the taxi driver had never heard of it and of course couldn't find it. We wandered around on foot, and when we did arrive, it was only to discover that a musician isn't afforded the same respect in New York as he is in East Berlin. No dressing room, no drinks, not even a firm set time, and of course barely any people in the crowd. We'd end up playing at around 4 o'clock in the morning, which on account of the time difference felt to us like 10 o'clock in the morning after a night of heavy drinking. Well, we contributed the heavy drinking part. When it was finally time for us to play, we were almost sober again. On top of everything else, it was strictly forbidden to light even a match inside the club, which we cleverly circumvented by having Till enter the room through the emergency exit to the side of the stage with his coat on fire. So we didn't light anything inside the club. Even without jet lag, the crowd was pretty tired and seemed not to get too much out of our show. At our second concert, we had to change in our rental van, which made us curse our stage costumes. Around 4 o'clock we got to go on stage. This time, however, fire was strictly prohibited. And so we fell back on our old show gimmick, which we used to do during the song Feuerräder. I ride on Till's back as an M style and use a fluorescent tube as a riding crop. The idea came to me in a town auditorium in Turin, where there was a whole box of fluorescent tubes sitting in the hallway. We were able to do it again and again, as we could find a fluorescent tube at every venue. We just had to unscrew it from the ceiling. At the end of the song, I always broke it across Till's back. Normally it worked great. And so off we went, crawling on all fours through the moderately excited crowd in the direction of the bar where several glasses were broken. Back on stage, Till planted himself in front of me and waited for the blow. I whacked him in the chest as hard as I could, but nothing happened. I kept trying. In America, the tubes are simply much harder. Till screamed at me, the song was almost over. And so I summoned all my strength and whacked him again. Finally the tube broke, in two, and the other end flew over Till's shoulder and stuck into Schneider's arm, where it remained. What was more, the jagged edge cut Till's chest open down to the ribs. The bottom half shattered in my hands, and the shards cut deep into my palms. Luckily it was the last song in the set. I went with Till into the little bathroom. Not only he was bleeding like a stuck pig, I actually saw the fatty tissue under his skin poking out. A woman who said she was a doctor came over to provide first aid, but when she asked what she could do for him, Till's friendly answer was to suggest oral sex. She clocked him and then went off. I doubt anyone in the audience registered any of it. And as we stood bleeding and half naked on the street, none of the passerby took even the slightest notice of us. A great city. New York was just as crazy as I'd imagined.